Why don't we go ahead and get started? Yvonne,
Okay.
you can do your introductions and then I'll talk, and then we're going to turn it over to Tiffany and Amanda.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today for our Tuesday Talent Series. It's the last one of our fall series. We've been going hard since September. So appreciate all the folks who've joined us for all the different sessions. Today, our session is Neurodiversity 101, what every business needs to know. Our sponsor for the Tuesday Talent Series is Plant Moran. Plant Moran is among the nation's largest accounting, tax, consulting, and wealth management firms and provides a full line of services to organizations in the following industries: manufacturing and distribution, financial services, service, healthcare, private equity, public sector, real estate, construction, and energy. Plant Moran has a staff of professionals throughout the United States, with international offices in Shanghai, China, Mumbai, India, Tokyo, Japan, and Monterrey, Mexico. In Colorado, Plant Moran has served its Colorado clients for more than 40 years with offices in Broomfield, Denver, and Fort Collins. Plant Moran has been recognized by a number of organizations, including Fortune magazine, as one of the country's best places to work. For more information, visit plantmoran.com. So I'm excited to introduce to you three amazing women who are very involved in this neurodiversity space, who are taking their time today to give us more information and to help us as businesses to know what we should be doing. And so we'll start with Teresa Corbelli. She has extensive experience working for acceptance and inclusion of the neurodiverse community. She was appointed by the governor of Alabama to the Regional Autism Network of Alabama, where she organized outreach programming and developed resources for the autism community in West Alabama. She currently serves as a community member for the Human Relations Commission for the city of Fort Collins. Teresa has a PhD in Latin American history from Johns Hopkins University and was an associate professor of history at the University of Alabama for 11 years. In addition to teaching and research, she's developed inclusion training at the university. Tiffany Feingold is an accomplished business leader with over 22 years of experience in the fields of healthcare and education. She has an extensive background in sales, account management, and leadership. In 2020, Tiffany and her husband, Sile Feingold, founded Guiding Bright Minds, a community of educators, professionals, and parents who are dedicated to helping guide and educate parents of neurodivergent children on their journey. In 2022, Tiffany co-founded the Colorado Neurodiverse Chamber of Commerce, an organization focused on improving employers' economic growth and development through the support of hiring and retaining qualified neurodiverse employees. Tiffany's motivation and passion for guiding bright minds and the Colorado Neurodiverse Chamber of Commerce stems from her personal journey as a parent of a neurodivergent child. And last but not least is Dr. Amanda Kelly. She graduated with a doctorate of psychological science from Maynooth University in Ireland in 2011. She's also a doctoral level board certified behavioral analyst. She has presented her research at national and international conferences and has published research on relational frame theory, avoidance and professional burnout, an application of acceptance and commitment therapy in applied behavioral analysis. Amanda moved from Ireland to Colorado in 2013 to pursue a role at Firefly Autism, a nonprofit organization providing a broad range of services and education for individuals, families, and communities. She's also the co-founder of the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce, an organization dedicated to advancing business through neurodiversity affirming practices. We are super excited to have these three amazing women with us today. And with that, I'll let you all take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'd also like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for the City of Fort Collins for this opportunity to talk about the needs of the neurodiverse community and how employers can accommodate and hire neurodiverse individuals. And what I wanted to add to the conversation too is I've done a lot of work in the autism community in Alabama, and I was thrilled when I came here and learned about the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce. So I'm really glad to the work they're doing. And it's personal for two reasons. One thing I found in my work in Alabama was that there was a lot of support for especially autistic children, but once they hit 18, the supports fell away. and Dr. Kelly is going to talk about this in just a moment. But there's a very high unemployment rate for especially autistic individuals. So I'm, concerned about my own kid who is autistic, about helping him find not only a job, but satisfaction and his service that he's going to contribute, but also my dad. One thing we found out when my child was diagnosed at 3 was that a lot of us in the family were neurodiverse. And my dad's undiagnosed autistic, and he looking back on it, he really struggled with employment from about the age of 11. And I think a lot of it was he just couldn't read the social cues in the workplace. I don't think he interviewed especially well. And his unemployment wasn't just a factor in his life and his sense of belonging and how he contributed to the community, but it impacted the whole family. So when we're talking about employing neurodiverse individuals, this really isn't just only about the person, but it's how they fit into the community, how their families are supported. So I wanted to add that personal history to understanding why I think this talk is so important. All right, I'm going to turn the mic over and let our speakers from the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you, Vaughn, and everyone for joining us today and having us. I know this is a topic that is near and dear to so many people's hearts, and a conversation that we're hearing more and more about. So excited. And I also want to mention another co-founder, and I'm going to share my screen actually, get started just so you can kind of see. So I do want to mention our third co-founder is Danny Combs, and Danny Combs is the co-founder for TACT, which is Teaching the Autism Community Trades. And today we want to talk about Neurodiversity 101. So the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce launched only just over a year ago. In September was our 1-year anniversary. And it's shocking because I don't know if many of you know, but the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce is the first neurodiversity chamber of commerce in the country. And that's just shocking. And so when Danny, Amanda, and I came together and we uncovered that, though we all have other jobs that we are focused on and CEO of other organizations, we felt in our heart that that is something that we couldn't leave undone, that we had to create and start this and support businesses, support the community, and look at ways in which we think about things differently and the flexibility of what that means and what that brings to the table. So the Chamber of Commerce focuses on several things. As far as obviously, one big aspect of the chamber is to help businesses, the economic growth and development and success of businesses. And we do that through ensuring that there's neurodiversity affirming business practices. And so over the last 14 months, we have over 90 businesses who have joined and individuals. We've serviced over 40,000 employees. We have some amazing organizations from mom and pop shops like Tall Tales Ranch, Dirt Coffee, Rhythmic Roots, to your large, 50 your large corporations such as Lockheed Martin, Charles Schwab, Craig Hospital. So it's a variety and a vast number of different industries as well. And so that has been the first 14 months with over 30 different events. So we're excited of where we're at. This conversation on Neurodiversity 101, and as we tell a lot of people when we first launched the first 6 months, all we did was explain what is the meaning of neurodiversity. And we haven't gotten that much more lately, so we know that we're having an impact on what that looks like. Also, I want to mention, I want this to be an open dialogue. So if there's hands raised, questions, chats, you guys want to jump in, please feel free to do so. And because I'm sharing my slideshow, I can't see. I know there's a way in which I could probably see all the people on here, but I can't. So Teresa, Amanda, Yvonne, if you guys want to say that somebody has their hand raised or has a chat question, please chime in, okay?
Yeah, we've got you, Tiffany.
Thank you. All right. So one of the things when we talk about neurodiversity, and being that this is, the beginning levels of what we're talking about, and it is called the invisible disability. When we're talking about the brain and how the brain functions, obviously we don't see a lot of visibility and what that looks like from person to person, though there is some maybe behavior or impulse things that people might notice that might veer different from what they're used to. But that's what makes this even that more difficult, and that conversation even that much more profound, is because it isn't seen. And we all can take the lens of when we see somebody that might have, let's say, a physical disability or something where we visually see a different of the impairment, our empathy or our lens of understanding changes. But when we can't see anything happening and it's all going on, from an internal sense, there isn't that level of empathy that happens. So that's one of the things of opening up the conversation when we look at what diversity is, and how we can be flexible in our mindset. So I want to touch on the basics. What are the terms and definitions? So the first thing is neurodiversity, and that encompasses all neurodivergent and neurotypical individuals. And it's the natural diversity of how the human brain functions. And that's one thing we can all definitely agree on, is everyone thinks differently, everyone processes things differently. And that's great. And that's something that we do need to have happen, is the diversity of how our brain works. And then specifically, those that are neurodivergent is when the person's brain functions different than what we think is normal. And that's another thing I think that I'm proud with the chamber is addressing, really, that there is no normal, that we all are unique, that we all have strengths and areas of opportunities. And that's, we're looking at that from the lens. So then you have neurotypical as well, and that's the person that functions from their brain standpoint in the level of what is deemed to be normal. In this graphic, it shows a list, because a lot of times when people think of neurodiversity, the first thing that pops up is autism, or the assumption is that they're talking about, oh, neurodivergent, that must mean autistic. That's a person with autism. That's the only sole kind of diagnosis. But what you can see from here is that there's a lot of different diagnoses that encompasses neurodiversity. And I do want to highlight that one area that is not on here is brain injury. And that has an impact on, or can have an impact on how somebody's brains can function prior to the brain injury versus after the brain injury. But what is this, when you guys see this, is this something that, did you know that there was this many? What's kind of your thoughts from the lens of when you look at these diagnoses? Is anything seem shocking, or does this seem pretty what you assumed? Any comments or feedback?
I have a question about cultural diversity. Can you say a little bit more about that one? Like how
So
that's
cultural, yes, I don't have a lot of information on cultural diversity. So Amanda, I'm not sure if you know specifically cultural diversity and what they're specifying on that one.
Yeah, I think it just means diversity of thought as it applies to cultural differences. There's a lot of intersection between maybe historically marginalized groups that haven't had access to the types of resources or diagnostic evaluations or things like that than others have. So I think that this graphic, which is not our graphic, but I think what this graphic is referring to is that there's a lot of diversity in a lot of different cultures and backgrounds, and there may be a lot of people who are underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or missed entirely because of cultural variables. So just kind of a nod to that.
Well,
Thanks.
and to add to that too, like when you look at cultural diversity too, in how what is deemed as normal or what people might think of certain behaviors and types deviate from what that norm could be, of different cultural, their normalcy of how they proceed or do things or think about things and process things that might be different than the dominant society and their viewpoint and that structure. So thank you for that feedback. Any other questions or comments on this slide?
I was just going to mention that it's very helpful to see this entire cluster together, because quite often we make assumptions as individuals in society that we represent neurotypical maybe, but in reality, as I'm looking at this list, there are 5 different components that I know are somehow active in the hidden aspect of my life that I don't necessarily present to the public. And it's very helpful to see all of these components together, because really, I don't think that anybody would pass the test of being neurotypical if they were closely examined.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And to add to this, and I know it's 2 similar slides, but yet different, because this doesn't have quite the vast list of diagnoses that cover and encompass neurodiversity. But what I love about this one, and you probably noticed right away, is how it highlights also the strengths and key aspects. Because we are going to go into a little kind of scenario of where feedback and biases do get infiltrated into what we think based upon how we were raised, and again what society expects and believes what normal should be like. But what I love about this is it talks about the creativity, the authenticity, hyper focus, innovative thinking, resilience, sensory awareness, honesty, verbal skills, and really takes what those diagnoses are and highlights some of those key strengths that are in them. And I love this was created by Dr. Nancy Doyle, again, not one that the chamber put together, but one that highlights it in a different light, in a different viewpoint. So I am going to jump into getting your feedback and input. And if you feel comfortable sharing, that would be great. But this is where kind of looking at the first impression. And when you do hear the term ADHD, I'd love to get your feedback. ADHD, what first comes to your mind? Is there anyone in the chat or anyone want to share? No feedback. So I know for me, ADHD, it automatically I think of, that child running around, somebody who is very hyperactive, maybe impulsivity, perhaps disorganized. Does some of those stereotypes ring a bell for people when they think about ADHD?
Tiffany, Olivia wrote distraction in the chat, and then Katie wrote requires patience.
Does require a lot of patience. I do agree with that. I have a son who's ADHD and autistic, and yes, it does. And that's where kind of in relation to that previous slide too, there are these things that impact some of these diagnoses as well that might be not so embracing from a society's viewpoint because of the impulsivity or maybe the disorganization. But also to think about, when you think about ADHD, changing that mind shift of, wow, hyper focus, creativity, loyalty, and some of those key aspects that might be also more of the positive aspects versus then some of that negative. And how about when you think about autism? What is the first thing that pops into your mind when you think and hear about somebody who might be autistic? I can't see, but is
Yeah,
anyone
Olivia's put in the chat sensory issues.
okay?
I was gonna add the
Yeah.
word, I think routine. It just seems like that's what I think. The routine's important, maybe.
Routines. Okay. I know a lot of feedback we've gotten before is maybe somebody who doesn't make eye contact, or I know the rocking back and forth, or somebody says an association that they might only have is with Rain Man, and different things. And that's okay. And this is where kind of there are some biases, or there are some impressions or stereotypes that we might have. And that's where, having that lens to uncover to say, okay, but now through education, through learning, through conversation, is how do we change and look at some of those positive aspects as well, and the positive impacts. Because the truth, as we all know, neurotypicals have struggles. Neurotypicals have ways in which they need to do certain things in certain manners, or maybe they, need drawers closed or these things. So what I think this also is sending a lens to is that it's okay that there are some of these areas that happen or occur, but also have flexibility in the mindset of what that looks at differently. And rethinking our reaction when you consider hiring or seeing somebody who might be neurodivergent, and what that looks like. There is one question on here, and I just want to ask if anyone does want to share, is how neurodiversity has impacted you personally or professionally. Do you look back maybe on encounters that you've had, or an employee, or even an employer or a neighbor, where you're like, okay, it makes sense now when you look at it from the lens of them being neurodivergent?
I'll throw something in. It's always a little hard when you're the extrovert to give time for everybody to participate. But I personally have neurodivergent tendencies, and I've seen that also in my children. And the thing that I would say is the primary impact is one of masking. That I recognize that my brain doesn't work the way that other people's brains do, but I have to kind of present what's going on with me in a way that is normal to them rather than what is normal to me. But other than the added component, the other thing I would mention within my family is just that one of my children selected a educational / career path that actually very much aligned with her tendencies, and she's wildly successful. And I've got another who has equal, if not greater capacity, but because that alignment hasn't quite come together, the perception of her within a typical environment wouldn't be as successful. And so it's really hard to understand the or to make sense of the internal reality and the external social reality, that and how those two things interact.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because that we're having those barriers are overcoming, and that reflection of that internal and external, and that path of success. And I think that's one of the things that at CNDCC, helping employers through our education and training and services, is to overcome that level of flexibility of how they're hiring, the process of the hiring, and I'm going to get into some of that so that there is that success that can happen from that lens, and having the opportunity to share. So, you know, when we think about doing this presentation and asking on the fly these questions, that really isn't neurodivergent friendly, because it is hard to put people on the spot to say, what's your initial reaction? You know, let's get that going. Some it's really easy, but some it's not. And that is hard to be able to speak up, to be able to share your feelings and your perspectives. So that's one thing. Through this education, through the conversations, we keep continuing to have this process of discussion and awareness. And here's the reality, and those that are in this community see the statistics continue to rise. And I know outside of it, we've heard, I get the question asked a lot, and I'm sure Dr. Kelly, you do as well, is why the rise? What's happening? Because right now, 20% of the population, so that's 1 in 5 people. And as was mentioned earlier, when I showed the list of all of those, I'm sure it's much greater because of the education, because of the awareness. And so also the staggering statistic is the percent of unemployed adults who are neurodivergent, 30 to 40%. And then 85% of autistics with a college degree are unemployed. And I would say probably 85% of them get to an interview, and it happens where the interview process and that success rate is abysmal. And that's where having and working with employers to overcome, and I'll go through some of the ways in which we've helped employers through that process. And then there was a report in 2020, 50% in the UK it was, of managers surveyed admitted they wouldn't hire a neurodivergent candidate. So I think there's also a fear of the unknown, the fear of making a mistake, saying something wrong, not being able to have that communication. And so that's where we want to make sure that we're talking and being able to feel comfortable having open conversations about what people need to be successful. And then the last bullet point I want to highlight, it's actually 4% of DE&I efforts include neurodiversity, will include disability. So only 4% across the country. So that also needs to change, you know, as we look at the efforts and the support. And I'm going to show a video about a hiring process.
Is it Stephen? Please, follow me.
Congrats on all the awards. So, tell me about yourself.
So, what would you say your strengths and weaknesses are?
Really? You don't look it.
Just so you know, the role has changed ever so slightly, but it's nothing major.
Let's find out a bit about you. So what experience do you have? What skills, what abilities? Anything?
It doesn't seem like you've had a job for a few months.
6 months? A year? Why is that?
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming. We'll be in touch. Are you okay?
I'm not unemployable. I'm autistic. And sometimes I get too much information.
That's a pretty powerful video. And I think what is most impactful is just from that lens of all of the input coming in, all of that. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at the chamber is that, you know, these accommodations and these changes and these looking at is not just to accommodate a neurodivergent employee. It's a universal change of a process that hasn't probably been modified. I know I came from corporate America, and when all of a sudden a job would come open and I was in a leadership role, and it's kind of not a really well laid out thought process. You grab a job description from years ago, you put something together, and all these things, and there's a lot of information. And one of the things, as far as the benefits of hiring, neurodivergent, and then on the next slide, or later on, I'm going to go into some of the things, ways in which we've helped other employers, that talks about just little things that can be modified during job descriptions, during the hiring and the interview process, that we'll go into. But here's some of the untapped pool of immense potential, and that is the reliability and the dependability, having innovative thinkers. And I was thinking about this slide, as I've gone through it many times. And when I look around the world and you think about different art and architecture and engineering and technology, and think about the beauty of the differences of those thinkers. And we would look at what they bring to the table. And just in the example of the gentleman, that one of the children, has that success when it's in that support, and then one where it's not so much because of the different flexibilities. And that's where looking at some of these areas of those strengths, of those potential areas that can uncover so much when feeling supported and looking at the different successes that happen. So workplace productivity, 89% of employees waste at least 30 minutes of their time every day. And we all know that. And that's one of the things in talking to employers, their process, well, I just didn't connect. So are you hiring for that connection piece, that social aspect, or for that job specific? And we know that there's a lot of water cooler talk that disrupts so much of the day. And typically under those that are neurodiverse, we see a more laser focus. They aren't going to be spending their time stopping by every cubicle on their way back to their desk or saying hi to everyone. It's a level of focus. And so looking at also the success. So JP Morgan Chase did a study that showed of autistic individuals, 90 to 140% they're more productive by 90 to 140% than neurotypical individuals. So it's pretty powerful when you think about the skills and you peel back the layers of the productivity and the success while they're at work. So here are some of the barriers to neuroinclusive workplace and the recruitment stage. So job descriptions. So Dr. Amanda and Kelly and I went into Denver International Airport, who's also a member of the chamber, and reviewed their job descriptions. And a lot of the aspects of the job descriptions were great communication skills. And I think that's just been put on the job descriptions years ago and has never been removed. But what exactly does that mean? Do they need verbal, oral, and who are they exactly communicating with? Is the communication because they're an out-facing, customer-facing, they need to be, able to share, talk on the fly, do that? Or is their only real person that they're in contact with their manager, their supervisor, or perhaps their little team? So why do they have to be great communicators, and what does that look like? And as you saw in the video, when somebody asks a question, and Amanda and I did a presentation like this last week, and one of the people who came out and said, who is autistic, when somebody asked, well, tell me about yourself, they really had no, tell me about my childhood, tell me about my work experience, tell me about my hobbies. It truly is such a open-ended question that has no guidance and direction. And from the lens of somebody who's neurodiverse, it's like, what do you want to know about me? That I got a 4.0 when I graduated. So being very clear and deliberate in what you're looking for and what you're asking about. And it wasn't until somebody actually sat down and told this person who volunteered to share their experience, where they're like, no, they just want to know about your job experience. But then even that's wide open, experiences that are good, bad. So just keep that in mind. Then you have the interviewing stage. And one of the things through the interviewing stage that we've seen to be successful is, why not hand potential interviewers a list of the questions. So, you're impressed with what you've seen so far and what was submitted. So now let's provide them, here's what we're going to cover in the interview process. That information shouldn't be secretive. You want them to present the best because you're looking for the best person. So some of those things is provide them with that. Here's who's going to be at the interview. Here's kind of the expectations, and just making sure that that's there. Same with the onboarding. I don't know anyone who's gone through an onboarding process, neurotypical or neurodivergent, that said it was a great experience. I don't think I've ever had a job where maybe the computer's ever been there and ready to go. So just being able to understand this different levels of areas to make sure that helps in the process of expectations, of support and flexibility through what that means and what you're looking for, the physical space, meeting structures, some of those areas. Any questions or comments? Because I've gone through a few slides that people would like to add.
It's Teresa. Do you mind if I jump in?
Absolutely.
I've been through a big career transition myself. So I've been in a lot of interviews lately, and the interviews I appreciated the most are when the questions are pre-circulated and you have time. I can't remember if you just mentioned that, but that'll help introverts. And I realize some jobs you do need to be, the interview process wants to see how good you are at thinking on your feet. But maybe interview processes could have a component where you get the questions ahead of time, so you have time to process them. That's also good for ADHD people who, or introverts, like, oh, I should have said this. I just didn't have enough time to really think it through. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
No, and I appreciate that, because that's the other thing is, some people it's easy where they can share, oh, here's what I've done, and kind of cheerleaders for themselves, where others it's hard to break down, or even if you're looking for facial, somebody could be super excited. Yeah, I'm proud of my accomplishments. But, some people with facial trauma or paralysis, vision impairments, other disabilities that may also be, unfairly impacted. And if somebody's looking for different ways in which, especially that body language, can impact then your decision, because somebody might be more charismatic and outgoing from the sense of being able to share and pick apart. But that's the other thing, is really being very clear and who you're looking for, what you're looking for to handle the job, and all of that, because that will make a difference in where you're going. And so here, I love this slide too. So what does, oh yes, go ahead.
Katie has her hand up. So
yes, sorry.
I have a question in terms of hiring, kind of around this idea of like self-disclosure and being a protected person. And I'm curious, like one of the questions that we ask in our interview process is like, what helps you thrive at work? Which I could see being a little obtuse, especially if you are struggling with those open-ended questions. But I'm assuming you cannot ask, are you neurodivergent? But how do you create an environment, and maybe this is a big question, in the hiring process where you can be supportive and accepting, but also like get to know what they're really needing in service of their thriving?
That's a great
Maybe-
question. And no, you cannot ask them if they are
Yeah,
neurodivergent.
I'm assuming it's like, are you pregnant? Like none of your business. Yeah.
Right, right. You know, but the first step is really showing, you know, and especially if, you know, you are neurodiverse friendly and having that opportunity, you know, whether it's joining, you know, CNDCC or other avenues, having your DE&I efforts, but to really show that we are neurodivergent friendly organization and stating that in the job descriptions, putting that on from a lens that one of the things as an organization we really want to accommodate and ensure we're supporting our employees. So we have employees that don't like, you know, the lights, so we can accommodate from that, or providing opportunity for flexibility in schedules. If somebody doesn't have to be there from 8 to 5, you know, because maybe they're a single mom or need to get there, or they just, you know, or maybe are never going to be on time, and that's just how some people roll, but that's okay as long as they're getting the job done. So I think the clarity, if you want them to ask what can we do to help support you, by giving examples then. So here's some of the ways in which we do support our employees. And we had one employer in one of our meetings share, and I loved this as well, is if they know they're hiring a single mom, or if there's a way in which something's disclosed that you might not know or you can't see, that's there, is say we have a group and they have a way in which, if it is a single mom and, you know, you go through an interview process and they're like, sure, we're flexible, but employers will say that, but then maybe they're not so flexible when you're on the job and your school calls and you have to run to pick up your kids. As a single parent, you have to be able to have flexibility. So then they have that partners to where if you are going down that interview process, and you can, that person can then talk to another mom or dad or parent who is a single parent, to say, yes, there's flexible. I can't remember the exact term that's used for that, but that's even before the process. So I appreciate that question. And that's where dissecting it down to say, if you do want to get to really uncovering that, is being supportive to say, we do want to include this as a flexible environment, support as best as we can if there's ways in doing that, and then offering that opportunity to connect with other like employees so they can really, you know, hear the truth, I guess, from somebody other than a manager or the higher HR department. In that, does that help?
Yeah, Tiffany, just one thing real quick is it's really important to understand that the onus is not on the individual. You know, people are already having to advocate for every single thing, and you know, exhausted with masking and everything else. So from our perspective, the onus is on the business or the employer to create an environment in which people feel safe to share if they do or don't need accommodations, and maybe even shouldn't even need to ask for accommodations because those things already exist in the workplace. There's already access to items. So basically, the ideal interview is where somebody walks in and the interviewer or the employer says, let me tell you about all of the ways that we seek to create an inclusive environment for all of our employees. And they talk about universal design, they talk about flexible environments, and then the person doesn't even need to ask for an accommodation because those things are already in place. And it's about dignity as well. Sometimes it doesn't feel dignified to have to ask for accommodations. So ideally those things would be there to begin with. It's a big ask, of course, but
can I jump in here too real quick?
Go ahead,
I just wanted to second, and thanks, Dr. Kelly. Those are great, and I think the language is really good. I wanted to share. So I was a professor for 11 years, and when I started, I wasn't super aware of DEI practices, and of course, my child had just been diagnosed. But as time went on, now this is a little bit different because I'm talking about a classroom, but I think some of it could transfer. at the beginning of every semester, I would have an inclusion statement, and I would say, you know, one of our greatest strengths is that we have people from all walks of life, and that's what makes this classroom really strong. And then I would loop in, you know, and I'm happy to work with you on accommodations. I've had autistic students in the past who knitted in class so that it helped them focus, and I had ADHD students who would listen to an earbud in one ear. And what I found was giving those examples, especially the ADHD students, showed up in my office all the time, just wanting to talk about what they could do to, you know, oh, I'm struggling right here. Or, hey, I've got this great idea. So by kind of giving a couple specific examples of what we've already done. Now, I'm not giving, you know, you'd have to check with the legalities of doing job interviews, but I think that could be a way to signal that inclusivity. And even if that person doesn't need that specific accommodation, you're signaling this is what we've done in the past. And hopefully they'll think, so they'll be, this employer would be open to giving me this, the accommodations I need. I just wanted to add into that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you both. That's very good. Is there any other chats or comments before I move on? And I do want to highlight, like, truly being literal and set clear expectations. I had a boss who'd be like, so we need to do this. I'm like, well, we need to do what? Is it you? Is it me? You know, we doesn't tell me, like, Tiffany, your job is to do A, B, and C. And so that just leaves, again, so much confusion that doesn't need to be there, in the clarity of what we want to do and the tasks that we need to achieve and accomplish. And the next slide, and I love this slide, and it's a lot of information. And as Amanda pointed out in a meeting we did last week, it's not neuro-friendly as far as all the information and details, but so profound and impactful. And something to, if you guys are not familiar with this approach, is to definitely take a look at the Canary Code for Building a More Inclusive Workplace. And what this dissects and what it breaks down is, on one side, it's removing the access barriers. So access into getting somebody into the door. So benefit options for different needs, for family status, fair compensation, valid outcomes, inclusive recruitment. So taking a piece of that access of removing some of those barriers to allow that flexibility, again, in what you're hiring for. And then on your left side would be the removing success barriers. And that's the other thing. It's not just that onboarding and the hiring process and getting someone, but it's the success and that continuation of the promotion once they're in, and that inclusivity and the flexibility of what that looks, and putting things in place that are going to make it an accessible, you know, environment for all. Amanda, anything else you want to add on this slide?
I don't think so. Just, it's a very busy slide, so sorry.
It is, but like you said before, it's great information in the details of having that thought process of, you know, removing some of those access and the success barriers.
Yeah, I think just the delineation of the two is helpful from a kind of a mental perspective.
Yeah. And then we're almost getting to the end too. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, with our language and with our approach and being over not being afraid to have the conversations, you know, obviously we need to be respectful of others. And one of the things that I think that a lot of people are like, you know, ignoring the differences between people, like, I don't see color, you know, that can be damaging and hurtful, as far as we do see, and we need to be able to have those conversations of making sure, you know, one of the conversations that we didn't dive into was whether, you know, first person versus identity first language. Some people might want to be called persons with autism or an autistic person. So there's a difference in the language, but if you're not sure, rather than being fearful of, or that you're going to offend somebody, is just ask a question. Would you rather be called autistic, person with autism? What does that um, allow, and for that availability, I guess, to have that open relationship of that level of understanding, but recognizing that words can affect how people feel, and knowing and coming from a place that you just want to make sure that you are asking those questions or being accommodating and having a conversation that makes sense for them. One of the things I wanted to share as we go through this process, and from the lens from the employer in talking through, working with somebody, and this just quick comment I want to get from people. If you ask the task, and this is simplistic and has nothing to do with hiring people, but it can be a lens of opening the eyes of the perspective of what it means. If I asked you all to draw a circle, so the task is just draw a circle for me. If everyone could draw a circle and show, I guess not me because I can't see anyone, but show what you drew. Tell me, was this an easy task for you to draw a circle? And when I asked you to draw a circle, what came into your head? Did everyone draw a circle? I can't. Are people showing a circle?
What are you going to do with my circle? Why do you want a circle? That was my question.
It's a
So
great
what kind of
question.
circle am I supposed to draw? Because what are you going to do with it?
Well, that's the great question, because my son, who's autistic and ADHD, and one of the things that's helped in the process of just uncovering the lens of how people's minds work and understanding that is something as simple as drawing a circle. I'm like, okay, I'll just draw a circle, and this was the task we had to do. But from his lens, he's like, well, what kind of a circle? And I'm like, what do you mean, what kind of a circle? It's a circle. And to your point, what do you want to do with my circle? But he's like, is it small? Is it large? Is it thick? Is it thin? Is it red? Is it blue? Is it green? What are all these things? So I think in your simplest mind of thinking that you're explaining something or that you're doing something is just to remember that how people perceive something that you're asking might be completely different than what you think that you're trying to ask. It's just draw me a circle. There's no intention. There's no meaning. But that's I think in that simple form of just saying it's different for all of us. That's the task. So what should we do now? So education, just continue to have these conversations, continuing to learn through chamber membership. And I could talk about the chamber membership networking. So one of the things that the chamber has, we offer about 2 to 3 if not more, events a month, whether in person or via Zoom. But networking, as we know, and collaborating with other neurodivergent individuals, entrepreneurs and business owners. We have a vast variety, and I think that's why we're so unique. And I love that aspect, because we have those employers seeking to hire and to change their neurodiversity affirming business practices. You have neurodivergent business owners, you have neurodiverse individuals seeking, looking, trying to get educated and advance in their growth process as well. And then so we look through that and ensure there is at least one person in your team who can coordinate inclusion efforts. So we're working with employers, and we don't just train, DE&I and management and HR and all those. We're like everything that we do, and I'm not going to go through all of those boxes, so you can go through that. But everything we do is also for employees, because we also want to ensure that every person at every level understands and has the opportunity for the neurodiversity training and neurodiversity support through the process. And then I'm going to end with my slide that says, there's no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone again. And open it up for questions, comments. I hope this was insightful, and if you to see CNDCC's different levels of membership we have, it's cndcc.org. And we have 5 or 6 different levels of membership opportunities. And if anyone wants to call and have questions of how we can support you as an employer, individuals, please let us know. That's all I have.
Does anybody have any questions or further comments? Katie shared that there's a great speaker that I lost my chat for a second, so I gotta find it, right? So Caitlin Walker has a lot of research on this. She calls it clean questions. So when you were asking about the questions about that, so great. So we so appreciate the conversation today. I think I teared up twice, so thank you for hitting my heartstrings as well. Sorry. At Columbine Health Systems, where I worked, we had a huge program through Project Search, and we had the most dedicated, committed employees that I hired someone who's probably been there 35 years, and I think she's called in 3 times, and one time she had a hysterectomy, so she had the right to call in that day. I think if you added up her work hours, she's worked the most at that entire company, right? And so all the data and the things that you've talked about are absolutely true. So we appreciate you putting this lens out, and you know, those of us on this call, many of us are champions, so we just need to, we have now some slides and some information to be champions for you as well, and appreciate you forming a chamber to do this great work as well. So any other final questions or thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I think we got some great input from the audience. I really appreciate the information you shared. And thank you to the CNDCC for existing and for doing this today, and to you, Yvonne, for sponsoring us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, great. Well, everyone, have a great rest of your afternoon, and these 65-degree days in Colorado are worth getting outside. So I hope you get a chance.
Sounds good. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.